A new report was released today on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, also known as RGGI. It's a cooperative program between several states committed to supplementing initiatives that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It details where program allocations end up being spent and criticizes the governor in part for shifting funds from environmental priorities to filling spending gaps in other areas. Joining me now is Conor Bambrick, the Air and Energy Director at the Environmental Advocates of New York and author of said report. Welcome to Capitol Tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
So we should note that this is not all bad, right? You're not chastising the governor entirely, but there have been instances over the life of this program, which is actually a while now, that its funds have not been used entirely as intended.
That's correct. I mean, by and large, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and how it's been used here in New York has been a very positive experience. Just to backtrack a little bit, the governor, to his credit, and his team at DEC and NYSERDA really led the way in strengthening this program and coming to an agreement that's going to keep the program going through the year 2030. So what that's going to mean for the state ultimately is more funding is going to come into the state. How the program works is carbon emissions from power plants are capped, and then for each ton of carbon each power plant produces, they have to purchase an allowance for that.
Right.
And then the funds from those allowances go back and hopefully help fund even more improvements in terms of energy efficiency.
So, but they do have an opportunity to, for the third time, is that correct, to tweak the regulations to make it even stronger, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so the program itself has been extended, but now we have the opportunity to change the confines and requirements of the program, but all the states have to agree?
Right, so all the states did agree last year, and this was a multi-state agreement. Now the states have to go back and actually implement that agreement. So in New York, we're going to do that through regulation. There are two sets of regulations that govern RGGI in New York. One is administered by the Department of Environmental Conservation. They will go back in and adjust the cap on the amount of carbon that can be emitted and make other changes to the program through regulation. The other set of regulations are run through NYSERDA, and those govern how the allowance auctions are run and ultimately how the proceeds that come in can be spent.
Okay, so just in the past, though, there has been at least one instance that I can think of in the recent past where RGGI funds are used to plug budget holes, and that is something that you don't want to see again.
No, definitely not. We've identified over the last 4 years or so about $170 million has been diverted from RGGI to the state budget. 92 million of those funds have been going to fund energy tax credits that that have been on the books since the 1990s, that theoretically the state already should have been providing funding for.
Interesting. So, but ostensibly one might say those energy tax credits are supposed to encourage people to use energy more wisely, to put in more, or companies to put in more effective, energy efficient programs and et cetera. I mean, couldn't you say in a very roundabout way that this does serve the larger climate change goal, if you will?
Well, you could say something along those lines, except for the intent of RGGI was that these funds were always going to be used to supplement and not supplant state spending on clean energy programs. So we have energy tax credits that were in place, signed by Governor Pataki, that the state was paying for. And now, over the last 4 years, we've seen the governor propose that the funding for those tax credits now come from RGGI, and then backed out the funding that was there existing to dedicate elsewhere.
Well, that's also the fault of whom originally? I mean, let's just say, and certainly we don't want to chastise George Pataki, he's out for a while now, but if in fact he made an agreement about tax credits and didn't attach in that agreement dedicated funding, then who's at fault there? In other words, for example, in the past that we have proposed lockboxes to protect spending, not necessarily this spending, but other environmentally required spending vis-a-vis the legislature and statute. And that is the responsibility of whoever puts that in place. But if they don't put it in place, it's up to whoever's in charge to use the money as they see fit.
Right, so I can't think of any instance where there has been a specific fund attached to a tax credit. This is something that's in the law that the state must be budgeting for year in and year out. It should be a part of the state's fiscal plan.
So how are we doing as compared to other states in terms of RGGI?
Well, this report only really looked at New York. Each state approaches RGGI proceeds in a different way. New York, by far, is the largest recipient of RGGI funds. And New York is doing a relatively good job when it comes to investing in innovative carbon abatement programs that are helping consumers and households save money to cut down on energy waste. I'm talking about programs like Green Jobs, Green New York, which provides access to financing for energy efficiency and clean energy in people's homes. Not only that, but it also engages with community-based organizations to help people get out there on the street and educate homeowners about this program. The program also engages in workforce development programs to put folks in these communities to work.
So you have some proposals as these two entities go about putting forth promulgating these new regulations. Does the public have a say in them? I mean, when you talk about the regulatory process, usually it's pretty intense and it's done behind closed doors and there's a lot of nuts and bolts, and not necessarily is there a public comment period. Is there one in this instance?
Yes, there absolutely is and will be a public comment period. Right now, though, there's no guarantee that NYSERDA, for example, is going to go back and amend its regulations. So that's the first thing that we're asking for. You have regulations at NYSERDA that have been on the books for 10 years now. And we think it's time to take a fresh look at them, take a look at how RGGI is benefiting communities around the state and where it can be improved upon.
Well, and you'd like them to stop subsidizing LIPA, which is the Long Island Power Authority. That's now the largest portion of RGGI funding, is that right?
So what started as a one-time allocation of about $14.6 million back in 2013 has now cumulatively added up to over $200 million. While at the same time that funding was being dedicated to LIPA, we saw LIPA actually scale back and cut its own renewable energy and energy efficiency programs. So now you have ratepayers from all across the state paying for LIPA's programs, whereas in the past, LIPA had been paying for it.
Okay, so that's a proposal that you would like to see dealt with, I would assume, early on in terms of the regulation requirements, is that they would stop doing that.
Well, we'd like them to take a look at where RGGI funds can be used the most effectively and what our report recommends. We worked with environmental justice and community-based organizations like Push Buffalo, out in Buffalo, obviously, Uprose in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and came up with a series of recommendations about how RGGI can best be used to help the communities that have been impacted the most by fossil fuel pollution.
Given the goals that the governor has put forth on renewable energy and the efforts that he has undertaken vis-a-vis climate change, to address climate change and energy, do you think that the administration is open to doing some of what you're proposing at this point?
I think that they are open to it. I think even some of the recommendations that are in there, they've already committed to making. For example, there's a recommendation that a loophole in RGGI be closed to capture certain power plants that aren't currently being captured by RGGI. The governor announced in his State of the State address that they would be taking action to close that loophole, and we certainly applaud them for doing that.
What's the timeline?
Our understanding of the timeline is we'll probably be looking at a proposal for new regulations sometime late summer, early fall, with an eye towards adopting them by the end of the year or shortly thereafter.
Are all the states on the same timeline?
Each state is approaching it differently. They're all on the same timeline in terms of when they have to be ready to go. And that's the year 2020 to 2021 is when the new cap will take effect. So all the states need to be done with their process.
Is it your hope that, since New York has been sort of at the forefront of this and also has the largest proportion of funding that it's receiving, that it gets out ahead of this and then sets the tone? Is that possible? Have we been able to set the tone for other states that are participating in the program?
Absolutely. It's definitely our hope. We'd like to see a healthy competition between New York and Massachusetts, which is another leading state, especially when it comes to energy efficiency. You have New Jersey looking to get into the program, and with the new governor down there setting some very ambitious goals for New Jersey. We'd like to see New York improve upon what New Jersey's looking to do. So yes, absolutely. We'd like to see the state get out there. And really, this is an opportunity for New York to lead in an area of equity or climate justice, if you will. So not only addressing climate pollution, but doing so in such a way that gets at the communities that have been impacted the most.
Okay, well, when and if this comes out, we'll have to revisit it, and you'll come back and review what it is that the administration has put forward. I thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.